Okay, so what I wanted to show you in this video is how to get started with our full value drawing. And we're going to start off with all white objects. And if you looked on your assignment page, the example that I gave you that I'm going to be working from in this demo is there, and I framed it how I would expect you guys to frame it in your view catcher. So all four sides of that box are touching the sides of that still life. And I have my little thumbnail drawing here that I did for you guys so you can see. And you can see that I have just shapes. There's no shading in terms of like grays or blending or anything. I'm just looking for shapes to make sure my shapes are accurate. I can look at these negative shapes in here. I can look at the positive shapes. I can look at shadow shapes and see if they accurately represent what I'm looking at up there. And it also helps me catch proportional mistakes. Like if this negative space looked drastically off, that would mean that one of these objects was off. So it helps in that manner. So you want to start by drawing this little thumbnail out first as a guide. And basically it's to get you familiar with these shapes so that you are familiar with them, so you'll recognize them when you go to draw them later up in a larger scale. So really slow down and observe what you're looking at. And that's what I always will be on you guys about, is take your time and go for accuracy. Try to get them 100% correct, because there's no glory in getting something close. Anybody can get their objects to look close or similar. What you're trying to do is really strive to get them accurate and represent what you're drawing up there. And that's how your drawings will get better from here on out. So, so this is just small. You know, I took the viewfinder and it was set up like it was in the example I gave you. I then went and I drew that box down here, and that helps establish these negative spaces, these negative shapes that I can then look to and draw also. Okay, so once you get that small drawing there and you're satisfied with that and it looks as close as you could possibly get it, then we're going to take your page and we're going to put a value down on it. We're going to put a light gray on there for reasons that I talked about in the previous video when I talked to you guys about value. And when you look at white objects, you know, that example I gave you on the front page there, you know, the first question you have to ask yourself is, how much white is there actually, like absolute white in there? And remember, what's the only reason you see anything? Because of contrast. If all of that was truly white, the background value and all the highlight values, if all of those were truly white values, how easily would you see those objects? Well, not very easily, right? Because there'd be a lack of contrast. But we see all those objects easily. All the front sides of them, the highlight side, the shadow sides we see easily. So there must be an ample amount of contrast there. Well, for instance, when you look at this object here, this big bottle here, I see that relatively easy against this background. Well, that means that there's enough contrast there so I can see that edge. So the next question you have to ask yourself is, what's lighter, what's darker? Well, when I look up there, the bottle to me looks lighter than the background. Well, if that bottle looks lighter than the background, what does that tell you about the background? Well, it tells you the background's not white. But now the interesting thing is, when I look at this bottle here, this highlight, I see easily against that bottle, telling me that this bottle's lighter than that bottle's lighter in the background. So neither of these are white. This bottle's lighter, so right now this one wins the award for being the lightest object up there. So what does that tell me? It makes me confident that I can put a value over my whole page because there's very little white up there. If anything, maybe 5% of that drawing is pure white. Your brain is telling you that everything is white. There's white objects because I painted them with a can of paint that said white. But basically, when it comes down to it, an absolute value, there's very little pure white up there. So I feel pretty confident in taking my chamois cloth like this, that's full of charcoal right now, and just going like this. I'm going to put down a value over my page. Just carefully, nice and smoothly putting a value down here. You might not even notice it. You might think, wow, that doesn't seem that dark. But look at this. If I take my eraser and go like this, can you see that shape up there? So that tells you that there's contrast up there. The background's pretty dark. So your brain is flawed in a sense that it doesn't know if something's absolutely white or absolutely black. It just goes by contrast. And if it looks relatively dark, then make this a little bit darker. Okay. So now we need to, we have our value down here. And I need to transfer that box, the proportions of that box, to my paper here. Well, so what I'm going to do is, I'm going to take my viewfinder, and like the video that I made for you guys that's on the assignment page, will explain this in more detail. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to take my pencil here. I'm going to lightly, ever so lightly, draw a little box right here. This side, and I just have to put a little dot or a little corner there. I don't need to draw this whole corner. Now this is the only time I'm going to use my pencil, for that and for just this little box. Everything else I'm going to use my charcoal, okay? Because pencil won't erase very well. So I'm going to use a piece of my vine charcoal. I'm going to extend these lines out like this. So I'm using my vine charcoal so it'll erase really easily. If you guys use Photoshop, you're probably familiar with this technique because the scaling tool in Photoshop does this. If you say constrain proportions, you hit shift and hold shift down and you pull on the corner of that box, it'll enlarge that box like this. So now here's the corner of my little box right there on that dot right there. So I'm going to go from this corner, I'm going to go up through there, follow that up like that. And now when I come across this way, I come down, there's my box. Now the nice thing is, watch this. I can take my chamois cloth and I can wipe that out, okay? So this box now is in proportion to that box. It actually needs to come over a little bit this way. Okay. No problem. Just erase that line. So now it makes it much easier for me to proportion everything. So I know for a fact that that still life up there has to fit in this box. Nothing can go outside that box. If I'm forced to make a shape outside this box, it means that my proportions are all wrong. And I made this, either the ball too big or this jar too big or something too large, okay? So what you're going to use is your vine charcoal. And the beauty in that is that you guys can erase. It's easy, it makes it easy to erase. And so it's not like using that pen. So what I'm going to do is, there's different techniques you can use. One of them is you can find the center like this. You could subdivide this. If I draw an X in here like this, there's the center of my box. If I come up here and draw an X up here, right there tells me that's the center of the box right there. So now I have reference to where things are, okay? So the center of my box in here falls like right about in there. So that tells me that my jar is a little bit higher, right in here somewhere. I know that the left side of that jar has to hit this side right here. I know that the ball falls almost center right there, and touches the bottom. So if I come straight down, I know my ball has to be right about there. So what I'm going to do is, for demonstration purposes, I'm going to draw this in just to show you how to go about this drawing, okay? So my ball is going to go here. Actually, it looks like it might be a little big. I'm going to make it about this big. Like that. And look at this, easy to erase. So the ball's going to be somewhere around in there. I know that this jar touches right here. So here's the thing. Sometimes people use that viewfinder and then they float their objects in there. Well, they're not really taking advantage of that viewfinder. You don't want to float your objects in there, because then you're just guessing where they are. Here I have an absolute, I know that these touch here. I know that this bottle here touches this side right here. Right there. I know that this bottle comes up here like this. See, I expect you guys to take a little more time than I am, but I'm trying to get through this demo for you guys. Okay, you with me so far? So I'm drawing this out, knowing that I can take my chamois cloth. You don't need to even use an eraser here, because I don't want to erase all the way down to white, because I want to leave my background the value that it has. So if I use that chamois cloth, it just kind of blends it up and picks it up. So this vine charcoal, only use this vine charcoal for these exercises. Only use this vine charcoal for drawing this out. Once you start shading, don't use your vine charcoal for shading, because it's not meant to really make marks. It's meant to be really light and to be able to pick up really easily. And what happens is, if you shade with this and then you want to go darker over the top of it, it won't stick. And you'll be frustrated because it'll always pick up, okay? So what I'm going to do from this stage is I'm going to use my blending pad. So the way I'm going to use my blending pad is I'm going to bend it in half like that, and then I'm going to pinch the top of it really tight. And I'm going to take my charcoal, I'm going to rub it on there like this. See this? Like that. And now I'm going to draw my shadow shapes. Just like I did on that up there. My shadow shapes, if they look funny, or the proportions look off, that tells you that the shape must be off somewhere. So I'm going to come in here like this. Remember what your shadow shapes do for you. They define the form. This shape right here defines this form. See that? This tells me that this is a ball and not a paper plate. So what I'm trying to do is, I'm trying to eliminate outlines. If your drawing has outlines, here's the key to this project here. If your drawing has outlines, you need to fix that. Because remember, this is an observational drawing, meaning you're drawing what you see. So if you have outlines on your drawing, that means you're seeing outlines which don't exist. You want to see because of contrast. So I'm putting in the shadow shapes right now. Being sensitive to the direction and the shape of those shadows, because those are going to define everything for me. Don't worry about an edge in here. Just put that shadow shape in there like this. We'll get to that edge later. And this is all in shadow down here. There's a little shadow up here. Something like that. Okay. So now, I still have a lot of outlines, right? But remember, ask yourself why you see what you see. Because of contrast. Something's lighter, something's darker. And what we said here was, we said this bottle was lighter than this background. Okay, well watch this. If I get rid of this outline, how easy can you see that edge? Not very easy, right? Why? Because I eliminated contrast. If I need to bring back that contrast, I have two options. The background was darker or the bottle was lighter, right? Well, if I take my kneaded eraser, this eraser here, the stretchy one, right? That stretchy one. Watch what happens when I lighten up this bottle. I have to be careful because it's not white. We talked about that. Look at that. Why do you see that bottle? Because it's lighter than the background. There's contrast there, right? Now, if anything, this bottle was probably the whitest bottle right here. And I saw that through observation. I'll get rid of that outline there. We'll do something like this. And I may use my bigger eraser right here. So it has everything to do with how easy can you see that object. If you can see it really easy, that means there's a lot of contrast there. If you can barely see it, it means there's a little bit of contrast. So when I look up there at my still life, the example I gave you, I actually see this bottle. This is as light as I can make this bottle. So if I see it easier, well, that tells me that this bottle has to be a little bit darker. Now here's a little trick you can do. You can take a piece of paper. I'll use this piece of plastic to show you. And I can hold it up to this edge right here. I can take my pad like this, and I'm going to darken this edge just a little bit. Did you see it? I just darkened it just a little bit, but now look at, you can see my bottle much easier. But now look what happens to the contrast up here. That disappears. Well, I can't, this side gets a little bit lighter because the highlight's hitting it, right? Light's coming down this way, and it gets a little bit darker as it rolls away from the light. So that's what's happening right there. Right there. But now I can still see this a little easier. Well, now that tells me that background's a little bit darker. So I can come in there with my pad again, my trusty blending pad. Go like this and darken this side up just a little bit. So that tells me that my background is a little bit darker right there. See that? So now we see everything because there's contrast here. Now look by contrast, look at the outlines here. See how this does not look like this. This is observationally. Later on down the line, you can get in here and do all this more sophisticated stuff like blending up like this, softening that edge, doing that kind of thing. Not so worried about that. In regards to this here, if you look at the photograph, this has reflected light. It's a little bit lighter underneath here. Well, in that case, I can take my chamois cloth, and right now this kind of disappears because this ground is darker. If the ground is darker, that means that this was darker. Right here. That got darker, and the ball right here actually gets a little bit lighter because of the reflected light. Like that. Watch this. So observational drawing is relatively easy. You're just drawing what you see. The key is you have to be able to see and figure out what's going on before you can draw it. Once you got it figured out, then it makes it easy. Or I should say easier. This is actually a charcoal pencil I'm shading with right now. This is the lead that broke off. There you go. So there's the back side of that ball there. So there's no outlines, right? It's all that. This ball here, the same thing. This is lighter than the background. And when I look at this jar, it's definitely not white. So I'm gonna get rid of my outlines. and make this ring true because of contrast. We said that this was lighter. Watch this. So this exists because of contrast, not because of outline. And I can come back and do the same thing up here. If you see an edge, like this jar right here, I see an edge right there because there's a change in the planes. There's a change in the surface of that moving away from the light. If it gets darker, it's moving away from the light. So that's what's happening right there. And this is interesting. Down here, this actually becomes, the table right here actually becomes lighter than the jar. Like something like this. And down here, right now, see how the ball blends in with this? If you look at the example I posted, this ball is actually darker. So what do you do there? Guess what? You make it darker. So watch this. I'll make this lighter, table lighter. So now you see the ball because the table's lighter. Look at that. That ball is the same value all the way around. It just looks lighter here because it's against something darker. If you have reflected light, you can take your chamois down here, put some reflected light in there. So that's what I want you to do for this drawing. Focus on the shapes and eliminate outlines. If you see outlines like this here on your drawing, triple F minus. Why triple F minus? Because you drew something that wasn't even there. So this lid, I'm going to eliminate the top part of that. And when I look up at that still life, it tells me that the lid is lighter than the background. So I'm going to come in here and make this lighter than the background. Like that. There, now that exists because there's enough contrast there. That's the only reason this exists. And try to get the shape accurate because the shape defines that form accurately. The more practice you have accurately representing that shape, the more accurate your drawing will be. Okay. So that's how you start that.